The Fujifilm X-T3 or the Fujifilm X-H1? Which one should you choose? What's up guys, Reggie B Photo here and welcome back to the channel. For those of you who are new, my name is Reggie Ballesteros and I'm a wedding photographer based in the San Francisco Bay Area. So in this video, I'm going to talk about why I chose the Fujifilm X-T3 over the Fujifilm X-H1 for my wedding photography. And this isn't going to be an exhaustive review that goes over a comparison of the technical specs, the features, and I'm not even going to do any type of image quality comparisons in this video today. Instead, I'm simply going to go over the reasons why I chose the Fujifilm X-T3 over the X-H1 for my wedding photography, and also go over some of the reasons why you might choose the X-H1 instead. So my decision to go with the Fujifilm X-T3 is really centered around what I need versus what's nice to have, but I don't really need. And based on this question, I was able to choose the X-T3 as the best wedding photography camera for me personally. That doesn't mean it's going to be the best for every single photographer out there. It really depends again on what you want and what you need versus what's nice to have and you really don't need. So now I'm going to go over the reasons why I pick the X-T3, and the first is the low light autofocus. The low light autofocus sensitivity of the Fujifilm X-T3 is at -3 EV, and I believe the Fujifilm X-H1 at its latest firmware update is somewhere around -1.5 EV or even just -1 EV. And closely related to that is that the autofocus speed of the Fujifilm X-T3 is the fastest that Fujifilm currently offers in both autofocus single and autofocus continuous. A lot of people have claimed that the autofocus system of the X-T3 have breathed new life into slower lenses like the 56mm 1.2 and the 35mm 1.4, which are known to have some of the slowest autofocus systems out of the Fujifilm X lineup. Probably one of the most important parts of me going over to the X-T3 is having the 100% phase detect autofocus across the entire sensor. So for me, I don't have to do back button focus and recompose anymore, and that was really important in swaying me to get the X-T3 versus the X-H1. And as far as image quality goes, I needed to have good enough image quality in low light, good enough dynamic range, and good enough performance at high ISOs. I didn't need to have the best that Fujifilm had to offer, but it had to be good enough to the point that I could deliver high quality images to my clients. And there are a couple other things that I knew that I wanted, not specifically for wedding photography, but just for a camera in general. So technically it was something that I needed overall the camera to have, and that was one, size and weight. I wanted the size of the camera to be smaller than a traditional DSLR, and I also wanted the weight to be less. The X-H1 currently as it stands is pretty much the same size as the Nikon D750 that I had before, and the weight savings wasn't that much. And the other thing that I really wanted was very good video capabilities and a lot of room to grow. So the 400 megabits per second, the 4K 60 frames per second, and all the other video features that the X-T3 has to offer was very attractive to me. So the big elephant in the room, the burning question that everyone has is, why don't I get the X-H1 for IBIS? The in-body image stabilization, which should be super handy for wedding photography. It's going to give me that low light edge, and it's going to basically be a game changer for all of my wedding photography. And all these things are hypotheticals and sometimes are a product of just good marketing from Fujifilm on their end. So before we get into what in-body image stabilization is good for, let's step back a little bit and talk about what it is and how it actually affects the image. So assuming you have proper depth of field and everything is in focus, there are two main factors which will cause a blurry image. The first is camera shake, and the second is motion blur of anything moving inside of the photo. So IBIS, in-body image stabilization, or basically stabilization of the sensor itself, as well as OIS, or optical image stabilization, are both there to reduce camera shake. Basically, you know that 1 over focal length rule that you hear a lot on the internet in any type of photography book or guide. Basically, IBIS and OIS is there to combat this camera shake phenomenon. So motion blur, on the other hand, can only be combated by one thing, and that's by freezing the image by having a fast enough shutter speed, or by using flash, which pretty much emulates a fast shutter speed. For my type of wedding photography and the style that I have, I'm there to capture lively images expressive moments and a lot of motion, smiles and laughter and all that stuff. In order to freeze that, I have to have faster shutter speeds. Typically on a wedding day, I'm shooting at 1/250th of a second, and in those low light situations, I'll drop as low only to a minimum of 1/160th of a second. I never really go slower than that, unless I'm using flash. So going back to what in-body image stabilization is useful for is whenever you need to drop below 1 over the focal length of the image. And for crop sensors, you can do 1 over the focal length times 1.5. So one of the longer focal lengths that I use as a main workhorse on the wedding day is the 56mm 1.2. And if I'm trying to be conservative as possible, if I do 1 over the double the focal length times 1.5 crop factor, that would still give me a shutter speed of 1/68th of a second. So the 1/60 is really close to that, which means that in-body image stabilization would only be effective at a slower speed than that. I've already told you that my rule is to never go below 1/160th of a second. It's a personal rule that I have, so that is why I don't really care about in-body image stabilization for my type of photography. It's a non-factor. It's not really that useful to me. In order to be fair to other X-H1 users, I wanted to do a little bit of research to see if there's any type of situations that weren't obvious to me that X-H1 users were using in-body image stabilization to be a very big impact on their wedding photography. So some of the reasons that people claimed are some people would drop down to 1/10 of a second to do exterior shots, which I do think is something that could be useful. At the same time, I only take maybe less than 1 or 2% of my shots are exterior shots, so I'm not going to purchase the camera body based on a low percentage shot. Other people say they just don't trust that their hands are steady enough, which again, we can just use shutter speed and the conservative 1/2 times the focal length times 1.5 crop factor to make sure that we're freezing camera shake. And even another person claimed that Fujifilm invests millions of dollars in order to develop in-body image stabilization technology so that we can get sharper images. And my response to that is, how did we ever survive in the DSLR days if we didn't have image stabilization? And the truth is, we did survive. So I don't really believe that reason either as being a main factor to adopt it for wedding photography. A good reason that I did read was for using the 90mm f2, which when you do the conversion for the conservative shutter speed for camera shake, it is 1/270th of a second, which is a little bit faster than my 1/160th of a second rule. So in that sense, I think in-body image stabilization would work and be helpful for that, but the 90mm f2 is also the least used lens in my lineup. So again, if we're going with percentages again, I would always want faster autofocus over just this nice to have handy technology that I'll use for less than 5-10% of my shots. The truth is, I'm using autofocus 95% of the time, if not 100% of the time during a wedding day. So if I can purchase a camera based on the cutting edge autofocus of a specific manufacturer versus 5 to 10% of some tool that might be nice to have, but I'm probably not going to use it all the time, that's where I made my decision. So now let's transition on to what are the reasons to choose the X-H1. And the first most attractive option with both bodies being currently on sale is the fact that the X-H1 plus the battery grip is very attractive and highly discounted. So if you're on a budget and you're trying to decide between these two cameras, I can understand if you don't have all the needs that I have made a priority on the X-T3. As far as autofocus goes, then the X-H1 is a very attractive option if you can deal with having a larger body and a little bit more weight to the body. And closely related to the size of the body is the ergonomics. The X-H1 ergonomics are way better than the Fujifilm X-T3. So if you have larger hands or you just need a more ergonomic body, the X-H1 is going to check that box for you as it has a deeper grip. The way that the shutter release is molded is different than the X-T3. And another thing that's closely related to the shutter is that the shutter of the X-H1 is highly dampened. It's very quiet, so if being very discreet is part of your brand and your wedding photography style, electronic shutter is not always reliable, especially with artificial lighting indoors, so the X-H1 will bring that very silent shutter to your workflow if you think that the X-T3 shutter is too loud. And one thing you can't ignore is the fact that the X-T3 does have worse high ISO performance than the X-H1. I personally think it's because they crammed more megapixels in there, and I kind of wish they didn't do that. But the truth is, if you use equivalent settings as far as exposure, aperture, shutter speed, ISO, all at the same settings, the X-H1 is always going to have better image quality than the X-T3. It's not a huge difference, but there is a difference. So if you're after the best low light image quality possible, the best high ISO image quality possible, the X-H1 is going to win in that regard. And another thing too is if you're not after the most robust autofocus that Fujifilm has to offer, if you shoot in daylight, if you shoot portrait settings, or you're just not really shooting demanding moving situations, then the X-H1 is definitely going to be something for you if all the other factors are important to you. So we did go over what the in-body image stabilization features are useful for stills, but for video, basically this is one of the main reasons I think people on the videography side would like it for, is that it kind of smooths out any type of handheld camera videography, movement, cinematography, that kind of thing. It's not going to directly replace a gimbal or a Steadicam or a slider, but it will basically get rid of a lot of those jitters. It's going to dampen a lot of the motion and make it easier for people to watch, and it'll kind of like give you that middle ground between a fully stabilized like floating gimbal look versus truly handheld. It's going to give you something in between, and if you're a videographer looking for that kind of style, then the X-H1 is currently the only camera that will deliver that look on the Fujifilm system right now. So I'm hoping that this video has helped you to kind of figure out how to decide between the Fujifilm X-T3 and the X-H1. So if budget is a big thing for you, I would highly consider the X-T30 if you want the fastest autofocus, as well as a cheaper body, just because the X-T30 shares the same sensor, processor, and everything like that. With the X-T3, I think it just has not as good heat management capabilities, and it also doesn't have dual card slots. And there's a few other things here and there that it does fall not short on, but it doesn't have as much technical robustness as the X-T3. And you do get the benefit of having one of the smaller Fujifilm bodies with a lot of powerful image capabilities. Again, at the end of the day, there is no best camera out there for everyone, but there is a camera that will fit best for your photography style. So again, the X-T3 is what I chose that best fit my wedding photography style. If you're an X-H1 user and you're very proud of it, I'm not trying to take anything away from you. I'm just merely trying to answer the question of why I specifically chose the X-T3 over the X-H1 and why IBIS is really not really a factor for me and my photography. Let me know down in the comments below if you have any other points that you would choose the X-H1 or the X-T3 over the other. Please be sure to subscribe if you haven't already. I make a new Fujifilm or photography video every other week. And also, if you want to see more of my photo work, please follow me at ReggieBPhoto for a new post every single day. And that's it for me. Remember to get out, go shoot, and I'll catch you guys in the next one.